I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I am going to say that this presentation is a little information dense, so it would be wonderful if everybody's okay with just letting me get through the presentation. Hopefully won't take more than 15 or 20 minutes tops, so we have a few minutes for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this presentation is about the fact that there is a climate emergency. It's not the overall climate emergency that I'm sure everybody in this call is familiar with, the emergency of climate change, but it's about the climate emergency that's happening at the Arctic Circle right now. Basically, in September of this year, September's the time of year when the Arctic reaches its lowest ice, we came very close to a blue ocean event, which is defined as less than 1 million square kilometers of ice. And it was the second lowest ice on record. Basically, in a nutshell, what's happening is that the Arctic is warming at more than 2 times as fast as the rest of the planet. There is some debate among scientists about that. Some say it's as much as 3 times, 2 to 3 times as fast. As the Arctic sea ice declines, we have a thawing of permafrost, which releases methane. We believe that there's as much as a 50 gigaton reservoir of methane stored under the Arctic shelf in the East Siberian Arctic shelf. The reason this is so important is that with the melting of the ice, the latent heat goes into the water, warming the waters. We also lose the albedo effect. The albedo effect simply is how the ice acts as a heat shield to the solar heat. It's extremely important to this sort of overall keeping the overall temperature of the whole planet. Also, the melting ice sheets create increased water vapor. They do lead to sea level rise. We know that for a fact. Probably most importantly is they lead to changes in the jet stream, which is what a lot of the beginning of this presentation is going to be about. Of course, it releases methane, and the overall long-term effects, if we let it get to, which we won't, would potentially lead to global food crises, climate refugees, and potentially global conflict and instability. The last couple of slides and the next few we're going to see are taken from this group at the Woods Hole Research Center, a group of scientists who've been studying these issues for a long time. This first slide is a picture of Thermocast Lakes that are forming at the Arctic. This is what they look like close up. Basically, you see that the whole permafrost layer is basically thawing and falling into the ocean. Probably the scariest and most dangerous fact about that is that complete permafrost loss at this area of the world could lead to 150 billion cumulative tons of I'm sorry, I'm just slipping ahead, of carbon release. That's on par with the current US emissions. And it alone could potentially use up 25% of the allowable emissions to stay below the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal set by the IPCC for the world. But probably most important is that these permafrost carbon emissions were not included in the global carbon budget. So that's a real concern, and that's something that part of the point of this presentation is to help people wrap their heads around. How that happened was that basically the Arctic is experiencing what is being called abrupt thaw. It was believed that as the ice would melt, that a vegetation layer would be created at the top, and that itself would become a carbon sink and would offset some of the carbon. The carbon sink would offset the carbon going into the atmosphere. The problem is that to get that layer, this vegetation layer here, To really get that to build would take several decades. Most scientists agree at least 2 to 3 decades, which is not happening because the thaw is happening so abruptly. Here's another slide where you see it. Here's what the models basically said would happen if there was gradual thaw. This active layer would form. But unfortunately, this is what's actually happening on the right, which is this abrupt thaw. We're having these Thermocast Lakes form, and we're having both carbon dioxide and methane released rapidly into the atmosphere. The take-home message is that abrupt thaw, if continued, would basically double the permafrost carbon feedback in this century. It's also releasing old permafrost carbon, which, since it's so old, we are not exactly sure of the makeup of it and the effects of releasing that. And we do know that this kind of abrupt feedback loop happened because the climate warmed 14,000 years ago. It's in the record that it had happened in the past. So a couple of the quick key questions at this moment are, is the Arctic no longer a carbon sink and becoming a carbon source? But probably most importantly, and this will address the emergency that we're facing, is that the extreme weather events that we're experiencing right now in the month of September 2020 can be directly attributed to the abrupt thaw at the Arctic. So basically, you could see in this diagram at the left, which is sourced at the bottom, when the ice thaws, the polar vortex becomes destabilized. That polar vortex has been stable for thousands of years. With the abrupt thaw and with the rapid heating of the Arctic 2 to 3 times the rest of the planet, we're seeing the jet streams become weakened and they become hazy rather than predictable patterns. When that happens, the cold Arctic air moves to the south, and we see both a greater number of storms, such as the storms we're seeing in the Atlantic coast and the Pacific, which I'm not sure if everybody on the call is familiar with. There's cyclones and severe storms happening in the Pacific right now. And also, I think this diagram, the right shows kind of nicely how that also moves warm air up north, which is contributing to the wildfires that are happening not just in the United States West Coast, but unfortunately in Siberia and other parts of the world. Okay, so what can we do about it? This kind of gets to the heart of what the second point of this presentation is, which is that we need to bring into collective consciousness the idea that we need to cool the Arctic and start what I'm calling the Crown Mandate, for want of a better word, which is an acronym for Climate Restoration Ongoing Worldwide Now. And the 6 tenets I'm proposing, with the top and first and foremost being cool the Arctic, will also include carbon capture on a big scale, stopping fossil fuels immediately and completely, worldwide reforestation, which is a huge part of the solution, regenerative agriculture, massive conservation programs, and the education of women. The education of women has been shown to basically create smaller families across the board from developed to the developing world. We don't really have time to go into this right now in this presentation, but if we do longer presentations, we can talk about that more as well. But the idea of the Crown Mandate is to see that while all these things have to happen simultaneously, and they have to happen now, and they have to happen this decade, cooling the Arctic really has to become a priority. Scientists, unfortunately, are not in agreement as to how long it would take to experience a blue ocean event. The consensus is it could happen as soon as this time next year to mid-century. That's cerebus paribus, everything else being equal. Obviously, we can't let that blue ocean event happen, because once that happens, basically the ice would decline every year very rapidly, to the point where we would have, God forbid, no Arctic ice, which basically can't happen because of the disastrous effects that would happen with both sea level rise and worldwide climate. So I guess the point of this presentation is to get into the consciousness and into the lexicon that we must cool the Arctic. We must create a mandate of climate restoration ongoing now. What I was thinking about what I could ask people to support right this minute today if they were interested. There is a group called the Arctic Ice Project that's been in existence since 2008. They are working on one of the two material means to combat the loss of ice. One, of course, is geoengineering, which is quite controversial and we don't really have time to get into right now. It's also called solar radiation management. And the other is this project being done at the Arctic Ice Project that's right now only being done on an experimental basis, a very small basis, but they need funding to get it to get their project going on a larger scale that could be deployed when and if needed this decade. So besides sort of our discussion of what we can do from here as far as to get the understanding of the urgency to cool the Arctic into the lexicon, if somebody really wanted to do something right now, I would say you can go to the Arctic Ice Project website, learn about what they're doing, learn a little bit more about the crisis from that. The other point I wanted to make is that we're dealing with kind of two critical challenges with this and with the climate crisis in general. One is that it has to do with the makeup of human psychology, which is we have to believe that danger is near to us to act. If we see something as far away, the other side of the planet, the other side of the country, and even the neighboring state, it doesn't compel us to act. We only act when we think something is near to us. So one of the first, I guess, goals of the project would be to help people to get the understanding that this danger is indeed near. It feels like it's far away, but it's not. And secondly is that humans are herd animals and that we need a critical mass to turn the flock when we want to change direction. Fortunately, that critical mass doesn't need to be a majority. It doesn't even need to be a lot of people. It's believed that it needs to be 3.5% of a population to create a critical mass to change the direction. So I'm kind of getting near the conclusion here, but basically what I want to say is that what we're seeing in terms of the climate, both the storms, the cyclones, the wildfires, are part of this crisis at the Arctic. We need to understand that this is happening now. It's not something far away. It will impact us right here. Again, not just someplace else far away. And I guess we just need to make some decisions about what kind of response is needed. I have two adult daughters, and my main motivation in staying as committed as I am to this work is that besides they're young and I want them to have a long and fruitful life, I'm very healthy and I'm planning to be around for a while. I easily could be here by mid-century. And I want to be able to answer this question, did I wake up while we still had the chance? I also want to say on that note, is very, very important to me, is that I think that we do not only have a chance, but we have all the means to turn this thing around. And what I mean by that is that I'm not saying I think there's some magic bullet that is just solely going to do it. But I think if we took all those means, the 7 prongs that I was explaining earlier in the Crown Mandate, and certainly understood the urgency of dealing with the crisis of the Arctic, I think that we could collectively turn it around. I want to end with this metaphor that came to me when we talk to people as to why we should care about this in the midst of the COVID crisis, which is obviously a worldwide health crisis. And this is what came to me. Let's imagine we're all sitting on a bus. The bus is full. And this is wasp flying around the bus. And this bus could sting us, that could hurt. Some people could be deathly allergic. God forbid they get stung, they could die. It's a serious situation. We've got to deal with that wasp. However, at the same time, on this very same bus, there is a package smoldering underneath in the luggage compartment. And if we're just obsessed with figuring out how to, you know, get the wasp off the bus, and we don't put any attention on what's happening with the smoldering fire, we could have potential disaster for the whole bus. So that's a metaphor that came to me to sort of get people to wake up to like why this is so critical and why we need to deal with this in the midst of the COVID crisis. The other reason is that I kind of liken what's happening, particularly what's happening at the Arctic, as a treatable, potentially terminal illness. And what I mean by treatable is to say it's something that, you know, if we don't do anything about it, it is going to get you in the end. But if it's something that you deal with now, deal with it with all the means at your disposal, we could treat it. I just have one last slide. I put this slide in so that if anybody wanted to go and look at the links that were the basis for this presentation. I have a lot more, but I tried to keep it manageable. And also this is quite a bit of listening and reading if you wanted to start with direct links for the data that I got in this presentation. But for right now, I think I'm gonna say that I'd like to be done with the presentation part because I would like to leave it open now, the remaining minutes we have, which looks like I did great. We have almost 15 minutes for the half an hour, but I'd like to leave it open because I'd like to get questions and comments from people about the presentation. So I'm gonna open it up. Let's see, I'll stop the share. Now I can see everyone. And if I don't have any immediate questions, I think I might have a question, which is like, was the presentation clear? Was the point well made?
Looks like we have a question from Tracy. I feel like this is a manageable enough group that I think if you have a question, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Hi guys, my name is Tracy and I've been really following what's been going on in the Arctic for a couple years, and I want to say that this is the clearest presentation I have seen, and I really am excited that you included about the jet stream because I feel like the jet stream is so key in understanding that the world is an open system and every bit in one area connects to the other, like the fires in Japan the other year, it was the heat in Japan and the fires in Russia and the cold in the middle of the United States was all because of the jet stream being stalled, and it caused all these extreme weather patterns across the world. And I want to just say that I really appreciate you being really clear about how the Arctic is so important to stabilizing the jet stream, and the jet stream is what everybody has based their civilization really off of in the Northern Hemisphere. It's how we expect things to work, and it's very frightening to see how quickly it is changing on us.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. That was, interestingly, that was one of my motivations to create this presentation because I thought, you know, we all know big things are happening, and even a lot of us in the climate movement maybe don't have that clear connection. So that was one of my motivations. The other was, and this is the part that I'm not sure how clear it was in the beginning or how kind of hard I want to make this point, but we cannot let a blue ocean event happen. We came perilously close this year, and you know, it's like maybe a simple way to look at it is, let's say you have a glass with your crushed ice, right? And your crushed ice is melting, 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 melting. Well, you want to deal with that, get that back in the freezer or whatever before you lose that completely liquefies. Once that happens, first of all, just to be clear, that cannot happen. That wouldn't happen in 1 year, but we don't know. Would that take several years? Would that take a decade? Unfortunately, we don't know. But we cannot let that happen because of both the sea level rise, which would be disastrous worldwide, and the impact on worldwide climate. So we're talking about something, you know, I'm trying to stay calm, but something that cannot happen. Now, unfortunately, the potential for that being a real threat this decade is statistically significant. And what I mean by that is that there are some scientists, and they're referenced in the links, such as Paul Beckwith, who are like highly likely. The scariest thing is not that Paul Beckwith is saying that, is that when you go to Nassau and you go to what I'm going to call the more conservative folks, they're like highly likely mid-century, everything else being equal meaning we stay the course, or, you know, back to business as usual. Okay, so that can't happen. And we're not going to let that happen. But I think that the climate community generally, and certainly the environmental activists like myself and my co-hosts that helping put this together, realize that we have to get an understanding of the crisis at the Arctic into the lexicon, into the collective consciousness, and most importantly, we have to do something about it. Now, when I made this first presentation to my little, sort of my home group of mothers out front, you know, my organizer said, you have to have an ask. Like whenever you take anybody's time, even if it's 15 minutes. And that's why I decided to include, please support the Arctic Ice Project, because that project right now is probably the best materials approach we have. But also, like in terms of the coalitions we're in, a number of us are in Mothers Up Front or in the SAVE Coalition, which is the Virginia Environmental Coalition. I think we need to get this into our awareness and understanding as well. And more importantly, into the awareness and understanding of the players, such as governmental leaders, you know, the big environmental groups as well, to start talking about it. And really that was more or less the whole impetus of creating this slideshow and this presentation, not really knowing how it would get out there, just knowing that it had to and that it will. So thank you for your feedback. I'm not quite sure if we're friends or how you found out about this, but it really means a lot to me that that you're here and your comments.
Honestly, I'm not sure how I found you either. I just graduated from Climate Reality Project earlier this month, and I'm currently unemployed during the coronavirus. So I'm like looking for all the webinars that are environmental related. And I hadn't heard of you guys before like yesterday, and I'm really excited that I got to join this because, excuse me, some of those slides are fantastic. And once I look at those resources, I'm planning on maybe utilizing those in my presentations. Particularly, I'm looking at going to vet clinics in the area because that's my background, and going from the domestic pet perspective on it affects all of us. So let's start with less of a red flag item, but break into climate change. But again, your presentation, this is the first one I've seen that's really clear on including how intensely I feel about like the Arctic issue. I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And it was only 17 minutes, which was a minor miracle. Do you mind if I ask where you're coming from? Like, where are you?
I'm in Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. So you're not even really that far from us. So you live in D.C.?
Yeah, I'm right here in Northeast D.C.
Oh, cool.
I write a little blog. I'll just go ahead and throw that in the chat. But just last week, I was helping release mussels into the Anacostia River to help rehabilitate the river and get it cleaner so that they can have a swimmable, livable Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. in 2025.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that link. I absolutely promise I'll go look at it. I'm excited that we're not that far because we are doing a lot of great things in Virginia and various groups, and you're close enough to potentially join us. So yeah, we've done great on time. Do any of the other participants have any questions or even comments?
I'll just chime in and say I thought it was fabulous, Tess. It's chilling to think about this stuff, but I did see a headline today. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm going to put it in the chat. It was on BBC about a plan to put like glass in the like up at the Arctic. I don't know if you've read about this, but I thought that was interesting. So I'll just put the headline. I'll put the article here in the chat if people are interested.
So absolutely, Beth. In fact, that is the Arctic Ice Project.
Oh,
no, it's wonderful because it's full circle. And it's basically they're tiny beads the size of grains of sand. And the experiment right now is about putting that out into water. There's a lot of variables. Will it float? Will it reflect? But It's only being done on a very small scale because it's in the experimental stages, but the proposal, it would be to do it in a wide scale to obviously be effective. What they mostly need right now from us is awareness and money. I was just looking at their website yesterday in preparation for this webinar, and she was saying basically that because of the COVID crisis, their donations have been hit, and the donations are being hit at a very bad time because of what's happening in the world, and they're needing to step it up. So I think, I mean, from my point of view, I'm with a couple of organizations, but I don't at the moment have an organization. I'm not ruling that out, but this 2 minutes, I'm feeling my main responsibility is to get the information out and to get support directly to them. I'm not ruling out creating some kind of an organization because I just feel like the word has to get out fast and big. I can't necessarily, I'm not opposed to working. In fact, we should work with the other existing environmental groups, but we don't really have the time to like sort of churn slowly through the system. You know, we have to sort of get on this, you know, right now, you know, and I need to say, because it is such a heavy presentation and we're almost at our 1:30 mark, I really still am optimistic with every fiber of my being that we can do this and we will do this. First of all, because we have to, and because we're humans, we're resilient. We're like, you know, every sci-fi or adventure movie you've ever seen, what do? We pull through at the 11th hour, right? In the last moment, you know, and that's what we're going to do. But we are there, you know, right now at that moment. You know, but there is one other thing I want to say with this. It's very important. And it seems in closing is probably perfect last word for me, which is that besides putting the information out there, which is critically important that people understand, I also do not want to dispense hopium, because I understand what that is and I'm really against it. Hopium is just kind of just thinking, you know, somebody somewhere from on high is gonna save us. Now, yes, I believe in spiritual forces, and I very much believe that all the forces of life are on our side, and we do need to call on them, and we will, and I do personally. But there's also a little saying, when you pray, move your feet, right? So spirit works through us, right? So the hope is in me, and it's everyone on this call, and it's in, you know, it's in humanity, right? So really, you know, the price of admission to not have this hope be hopium, but to have it be real and valid and meaningful, is our commitment to use our feet and to do whatever is in our power to mitigate this crisis. So that's kind of why I made this presentation. That's why I invited you all here. And that's why I believe that we actually still can turn this around. And somehow we managed to do this in a half an hour. I think it's fantastic. Not take up too much time, but there's at least a minute if anybody has any last minute questions, comments. Alrighty, so I think that we agreed that we did tape this, and I think we'll probably put the link to the recording. I don't know, we didn't discuss this. I guess it should be on the Facebook page or wherever. Please be sure to share that far and wide. I also have this presentation in a PDF form, easy peasy to read, and the links open up. So I'll go ahead and put that, I'm not sure how to put the recording, but I'm gonna hope one of my ladies that helped me will be able to do that. And I'll go ahead and put the PDF link. And I'll also, I guess we can leave the page open. If one of y'all make me a moderator for the page, then I'd like to leave the page open so that if we have any, you know, any ongoing questions or discussions, we could potentially do it right there at the page. I want to thank you all for the honor of your attention and for your courtesy of being good listeners. Tracy, I'm delighted that we got to meet you. I know everyone else on the call prior to today, but I will look at your blog, and I very much would like to stay connected. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate your time, Tess. I would definitely like to further this conversation with you as well.
Yeah, we're going to make that happen for sure.